In the brutal hierarchy of global power, some secrets are too dangerous to exist in the light. When the law fails, when governments crumble, and when billionaires buy their way out of genocide, there is only one man the world's elite call upon to maintain order. I am Harrison Cole, former commander of Tier 1 Special Operations and founder of Aegis Global Security, a $4 billion private defense empire. I did not believe in marriage. I did not believe in softness. My life was a cold, mathematical calculation of tactical geometry, perimeter defense grids, and lethal force. I lived in a world of bulletproof stone, armored motorcades, and absolute, unyielding discipline. Until a legal mandate and a dead brother's final vow forced me to sign a marriage certificate with the most dangerous woman in North America. Her name was Dr. Elena Vance. Elena was not a helpless socialite or a fragile victim. She was a 27-year-old brilliant geneticist who had just decoded a weaponized virus engineered by Biocorp International, a corrupt, multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical cartel. She held the master genomic sequence that could prove Biocorp was testing lethal pathogens on civilian populations across South America. When Biocorp put a $50 million bounty on her head, her father, a former high-ranking magistrate, used his final political favor before his assassination to arrange a legally binding, high-security marriage between Elena and myself. Under federal protective laws, marrying the founder of a private military syndicate granted her absolute diplomatic immunity, placing her under my sole legal jurisdiction. She didn't want my protection, and I didn't want a wife. The first night she arrived at my isolated mountain estate in the snow-covered peaks of Wyoming, a Category 5 blizzard was burying the surrounding forest in 4 feet of snow. The temperature outside was 20 below zero, but the moment she walked into the grand stone foyer of my estate, the air in the room caught fire. Elena was breathtaking in a way that shattered my legendary military control. She was a woman of magnificent, unapologetic, and voluptuous substance. She didn't fit the starved, fragile aesthetic of the women who drifted through high society galas. She wore a deep, emerald velvet gown that draped flawlessly over the sweeping, rich curves of her full hips, clinging to her soft waist, revealing the tantalizing porcelain curve of her shoulders. Her dark, thick waves of hair were pinned up loosely, framing a face of regal, terrifying intelligence. She stood near the roaring stone fireplace, holding a glass of bourbon, her dark hazel eyes scanning my 6'4" tactical frame with cold, analytical precision. She didn't look at my holstered custom pistol with fear. She looked at me as if I were a puzzle she had already solved. "You're staring, Commander Cole." Her velvet voice drifted through the high-ceilinged room, rich, smooth, and entirely unbothered by the blizzard howling against the ballistic glass. "Or should I call you my husband now? I believe the ink on our marriage contract dried 3 hours ago." I stepped closer to her, my heavy boots making no sound on the hardwood floor, my broad shoulders blocking out the warmth of the fire. The scent of her, a heady, intoxicating mix of vanilla, cedar, and rain, hit my senses like a physical concussion. "The marriage is a tactical arrangement, Elena," I growled, my deep voice rumbling low in my chest like distant thunder. "It gives me legal authority to keep federal marshals off my land and shoots down Biocorp's extradition writs. Do not mistake a legal document for affection." Elena took a slow, deliberate step toward me, her emerald velvet dress rustling softly against her lush thighs. She stopped just inches away, her soft, warm body radiating an intense heat that cut straight through the freezing draft of the room. She tilted her head up, her hazel eyes locking onto mine with fierce, breathless defiance. "I didn't ask for your affection, Harrison," she whispered, her voice a silky blade that carved into my soul. "I asked for your guns. Biocorp has 3 wet work teams hunting my genomic drive. So tell me, Did I marry a wall of steel, or am I going to have to defend myself when the storm clears? I stared down at her, my large, calloused hand reaching out before my brain could stop the impulse. My fingers cupped the side of her soft, flawless jaw, my thumb tracing the breathtaking curve of her lower lip. I felt her pulse spike violently beneath my touch, her chest rising and falling rapidly against her emerald gown. "You married an apex predator, Elena," I whispered, my voice dropping to a low, possessive frequency that rattled her composure for the very first time. "No one touches my property, and as long as you wear my ring, you belong to me." By midnight, the blizzard had completely severed the mountain pass, cutting off all road access for 50 miles. Electricity lines were down across the valley, leaving my fortress running entirely on subterranean geothermal generators and satellite links. Inside the master suite, the fire crackled warmly against the dark stone hearth. Elena sat at a massive oak desk in the corner, her encrypted tablet glowing blue in the dim light, her dark curls falling over her shoulders as her fingers flew across the mechanical keys. She had discarded her heavy coat, wearing only a soft cashmere sweater that draped over her full curves, accentuating the lush line of her hips and waist. She was attempting to bypass BioCorp's secondary firewalls to upload the master genomic sequence to an international health tribunal. I stood in the shadows near the doorway, clad in a black thermal shirt that stretched tight across my broad chest, watching her every move. I was supposed to be monitoring the perimeter thermal cameras, but my eyes refused to leave her. Every time she shifted in her seat, every time she let out a soft, frustrated sigh, a dark, possessive hunger gnawed at my gut. I had commanded armies in war zones, but standing in this room with my forced wife, trapped by a blizzard, was testing every fiber of my military discipline. "You're doing it again, Harrison," Elena murmured without looking up from her screen, her velvet voice laced with a subtle, teasing warmth. "Doing what?" I growled softly, stepping out of the shadows. "Standing there like a dark ghost, watching me as if I'm about to vanish into the air," she said, turning her chair around to face me. Her hazel eyes swept over my heavy shoulders, my scarred jaw, and the absolute lethal intensity in my gaze. "Are you guarding me from BioCorp? Or are you guarding yourself from me?" I crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping directly in front of a chair. I leaned down, placing both of my large hands on the armrests, trapping her lush, breathtaking body between my arms, leaning in until my face was inches from hers. "BioCorp is 50 miles away in the snow, Elena," I growled, my deep voice thick with an all-consuming, terrifying heat. "Right now, the only danger in this house is standing right in front of you." Elena gasped softly, her breath catching in her throat, but she didn't pull back. Instead, she reached up, her soft, delicate fingers touching the heavy scar running along my neck, her touch igniting an electric current through my spine. "I'm not afraid of you, Harrison," she whispered, her eyes locking onto my mouth with fierce, undeniable temptation. "You signed the contract to keep me safe. But I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. You don't want a contract. You want me." Before I could answer, the high-pitched, rhythmic chime of my thermal security grid shattered the intimate quiet of the room. Red emergency strobes flashed silently along the top perimeter of the stone walls. My eyes narrowed into lethal slits. Thermal cameras on the South Ridge had just picked up 12 high-temperature signatures moving through the snowstorm toward the main estate gate. BioCorp's private mercenary squad hadn't waited for the storm to clear. Equipped with snowmobiles, thermal optic gear, and heavy breaching charges, they had braved the Category 5 blizzard to execute a night raid on my home. I stood up instantly, my posture shifting into the terrifying, mechanical stillness of an executioner preparing for battle. I reached for my tactical vest, strapping it over my chest, racking the slide of my heavy assault rifle. I turned back to Elena. She stood up from her chair, holding her tablet tightly, her dark hazel eyes burning with fierce, unwavering trust. "Lock the internal blast doors behind me, Elena," I commanded, my deep voice rumbling like thunder. "Finish your decryption. I am going out into the snow to show Biocorp what happens when they invade my sanctuary." Elena walked up to me, her soft hands gripping the edges of my tactical vest, pulling me down until our lips were mere millimeters apart. "Don't leave a single one of them breathing, Harrison," she whispered, her velvet voice laced with pure venom. "Show them why you're the only man I'll ever bow to." A dark, ferocious smile touched my lips. I cupped the back of her head, crushing my lips against hers in a brief, possessive, scorching kiss that tasted of snow and fire. "They will die in the whiteout, my queen," I growled against her lips, then turned and strode out into the freezing night. The blizzard outside the estate was a swirling wall of white chaos, but inside my mind there was only cold, mechanical, lethal math. The wind howled through the pine trees at 60 miles an hour, driving freezing snow into blinding waves. To Biocorp's mercenaries, the Category 5 storm was an obstacle. To me, it was my domain. I was an apex predator who had spent 15 years mastering the art of winter warfare in the world's most unforgiving climates. I stepped out onto the heavy stone balcony overlooking the south courtyard, my thermal optics engaging. 12 red heat signatures were advancing through the deep snowdrifts, armed with suppressed assault rifles and heavy breaching charges. They thought they were conducting a surprise raid on a remote mountain house. They didn't realize they had breached the private fortress of a former Tier 1 commander who lived for the hunt. I dropped off the balcony into a 4-foot snowdrift, making no sound, merging completely with the white void. My suppressed rifle barked through the roaring wind. Thud, thud, thud. 3 mercenaries advancing near the outer gate dropped simultaneously before their feet could clear the snow. Hollow point rounds shattered their tactical helmets, dropping them into the freezing white drifts. The remaining operatives panicked, firing wildly into the swirling storm, but they were shooting at ghosts. I moved through the whiteout with relentless, terrifying grace. I didn't seek cover. I moved through the deep snow like an unstoppable force of nature, driven by an apocalyptic rage that demanded total annihilation for anyone who dared to step onto my land to threaten my wife. A massive mercenary, wielding a heavy breaching shotgun, stepped out from behind a snowmobiles, aiming directly toward the estate entrance. Before he could pull the trigger, I closed the distance in a fraction of a second. I grabbed the hot barrel of his shotgun, forcing it skyward as it discharged uselessly into the storm, drove my tactical knee into his ribs with bone-crushing power, and drove my combat blade straight through his throat. He collapsed into the snow, gagging, crimson blood staining the white drift beneath his vest. I didn't pause to watch him freeze. I racked the slide of my pistol, clearing 3 more mercenaries who attempted to reach the main hall. In less than 4 minutes, the gunfire died down, replaced only by the howl of the wind and the freezing hiss of the snow. The 12-man hit squad had been completely erased, their bodies buried beneath the rapidly accumulating snow. I walked back into the grand foyer, my heavy combat boots dripping snow and blood onto the stone floor. I unbuckled my tactical vest, tossing it aside, and stepped up the spiral staircase toward the master suite. Elena was standing by the desk, holding her encrypted tablet, when she saw me walk into the room, covered in frost, cordite, and the blood of her enemies. She didn't step back. She looked at me with an intense, intoxicating mixture of awe, relief, and absolute devotion. I reached out, my large, cold hand taking her soft wrist, pulling her lush, breathtaking body flush against my chest. "The South Ridge is clear, Elena," I growled, my deep voice rough and vibrating with adrenaline. BioCorp's squad is dead. No one will ever threaten you on this mountain." Elena reached up, her soft, delicate fingers framing my frozen jaw, completely unbothered by the cold dripping from my skin. She pressed her warm body flush against my chest, her hazel eyes locking onto mine with fierce intensity. "I knew you'd burn them in the snow, Harrison," she whispered, her velvet voice trembling with pure emotion. "Now, let's finish BioCorp forever." It was 4:30 a.m. The storm outside had begun to recede, leaving a stark, quiet twilight hanging over the jagged peaks of Wyoming. Inside the master suite, the fire roared warmly against the stone hearth, illuminating the room in amber light. Elena sat at the primary master terminal, her soft cashmere sweater draped over her shoulders, her dark curls pinned back as her fingers flew across the keyboard. Her genomic drive was plugged directly into my syndicate's satellite uplink array. I stood behind her, wearing a dark thermal shirt and tactical trousers, my large hands resting on the back of her leather chair, my 6'4" body looming over her like an iron wall. "I have penetrated BioCorp's primary global server in Geneva, Harrison," Elena murmured, her velvet voice ringing with absolute, chilling triumph. "Using the master encryption sequence from this drive, I've unlocked their private clinical archives. $70 billion in illegal pharmaceutical patents, government bribe ledgers, and human trial data." She stopped typing, leaning back against my chest, looking up into my cold eyes with a dark, breathtaking smile. "BioCorp thought they could murder my father and buy the world with their blood money. But money in a digital network is just code, and I hold the key to their destruction." I reached down, my large, calloused hand coming to rest on her soft, voluptuous waist, my thumb tracing the rich curve of her hip through the cashmere. "What is your decree, my queen?" I growled softly into her ear, my deep voice rumbling through her entire frame. "I'm executing a complete public broadcast protocol," Elena whispered, her dark hazel eyes burning with righteous vengeance. "I am transmitting the unedited genomic trials and the murder warrants directly to the World Health Organization, the Department of Justice, and every major news network across 5 continents. And I am freezing their $70 billion corporate treasury through international court mandates." She hit the central enter key with absolute, ruthless finality. On the secondary monitors, line after line of green corporate data turned blood red before flickering into permanent void. In a single keystroke, BioCorp International's empire was reduced to ash. Their stock plummeted to zero. Federal agents raided their corporate headquarters in New York, and international arrest warrants were issued for their entire board of directors. "It's done, Harrison," Elena breathed, a single tear of pure, overwhelming victory escaping her eye. "BioCorp is dead." Before I could answer, my second-in-command, Marcus, called over my earpiece. "Boss," Marcus reported, his voice tight. "BioCorp's CEO, Victor Vance, just realized his warrants were issued. He's currently at his private airfield in Denver, trying to board a charter jet to flee to a non-extradition country." I looked down at Elena. Her hazel eyes met mine, burning with a silent, absolute demand. She didn't want Victor Vance to spend 10 years in a luxurious country club federal prison. She wanted the monster who had ordered her father's assassination to face the executioner she had married. "Ready the long-range interceptor jet, Marcus?" I commanded coldly, my eyes never leaving Elena's face. "I am going to personally collect Victor Vance's final debt." 3 hours later, the sun broke over the snowy peaks of Wyoming, casting golden light across the white wilderness. Victor Vance had been intercepted on the tarmac in Denver, his jet grounded by federal marshals, his empire dismantled, and his life ruined before he could step foot on the plane. I returned to the estate, walking through the heavy oak doors, discarding my weapons, my heart pounding with a deep, possessive hunger that had nothing to do with war. The storm had passed. The mountain was silent. I walked into the master suite. Elena was standing near the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sunlit snowfields. She had taken off her heavy sweater, wearing a soft, form-fitting silk lounge set that draped flawlessly over every rich, breathtaking curve of her full hips and voluptuous waist. When she heard my footsteps, she turned around. She saw my calm eyes, my clean face, and she knew that the monster who had hunted her family was in chains forever. She didn't hesitate. She ran across the room, throwing her soft arms around my neck, her lush, magnificent body colliding with my unyielding frame with breathtaking force. I caught her effortlessly, my large hands wrapping firmly around her soft waist, lifting her off her feet, pulling her flush against my chest. She buried her face in my neck, inhaling the scent of cedar, snow, and my skin, her body trembling with pure relief and unbridled passion. "It's over, Harrison," she whispered, her velvet voice thick with emotion against my skin. "Biocorp is gone. My father has justice. I'm finally free." I pulled back slightly, my large hands framing her soft, regal face, my thumbs gently tracing her cheekbones. "You were always free, my sweet queen," I murmured, my deep voice thick with an all-consuming, possessive heat. "You just needed a husband who was ruthless enough to clear your path." Elena looked up into my dark eyes, her hazel gaze burning with a fierce, eternal devotion that scorched my soul. "And what happens to the marriage contract now, Commander Cole?" she asked softly, her full hips pressing deliberately into mine. "The threat is gone. The legal mandate is complete. Are you going to tear up the paper?" I let out a low, dark growl, tightening my grip on her lush waist, backing her against the stone hearth until she was completely trapped within my embrace. "That paper was just a legal technicality, Elena," I whispered fiercely against her lips, my gaze dropping to her mouth before locking onto her soul. "You are never leaving this mountain, Mrs. Cole. You can run global genetic research labs from this terminal. You can change the world with your mind. But your body, your heart, and your life belong to me." Elena gasped softly, a shiver of intense ecstasy running through her body. She didn't push me away. She leaned up, tangling her soft fingers in my dark hair, her lips capturing mine in a deep, scorching kiss that sealed our destiny forever. "I'm not leaving, Harrison," she whispered against my mouth. "I've finally found my home, in the kingdom of stone. True power in this world isn't measured by the wealth you hold or the contracts you sign in blood. It is measured by finding a woman whose mind outshines the darkness and having the sheer, unyielding strength to slaughter anyone who dares to threaten her light. When a lethal protector marries an untouchable queen, he doesn't just keep her safe. He kneels at her feet and turns the rest of the world to ash."